Put the rifle down, girl. You'll hurt yourself. The laughter cut through the thin mountain air like a blade. 5 voices, 5 men who'd spent their lives turning targets into statistics and insurgents into body counts. Men who'd earned their beards in Fallujah and Ramadi, who'd stacked kills in places whose names were still classified. Men who looked at Corporal Marin Whitlock and saw a mistake wrapped in a uniform. She heard every word. Every syllable landed exactly where it was aimed. But Marin said nothing. She never did. Because her grandfather, Gunnery Sergeant Royce Whitlock, U.S. MC Force Recon, 3 tours in Desert Storm, had taught her something when she was 12 years old, standing on his Wyoming ranch with a beat-up Remington 700 and a row of tin cans at 400 yards. Marin, he'd said, his voice like gravel in a coffee can, words are just wind. Can't nobody argue with a bullet that hits what it's aimed at. You let your shooting talk for you. Always. She'd hit every can that day, and every day after. Dawn bled across the eastern ridge of Firebase Summit Ridge. The light was pale, cold, the color of old steel. Smoke still hung in the air from fires that had burned themselves out. The smell of cordite and copper, diesel fuel and something else, something older. 11 body bags lay in a row near the landing zone. Black plastic catching the first rays of sun. Heavy, final, anonymous. A single rifle leaned against a sandbag wall, barrel still warm. MK-13 Mod 7. 43 rounds expended. 11 men dead because of it. Not 11 enemies. 11 Americans who died before the woman holding that rifle had been given permission to save them. Master Chief Gabriel Thorson stood at the Tactical Operations Center, staring at a single notation on the after-action report. His hands shook as he read it. Read it again. Read it a third time because the number couldn't be real. 3,200 meters. Confirmed kill. Enemy Supreme Commander, Whitlock M. Corporal. He looked up. Looked out at Firebase Summit Ridge, at the mountains beyond, at the valley floor where 250 insurgents had charged up the slope like a living wall of rage in steel. Looked at the ground where they'd fallen, where their assault had shattered like glass against stone. All because of one woman they'd put in the dead zone. One woman they'd told to stay quiet. One woman whose warnings they'd ignored for 18 hours. Thorson closed the report. His throat was tight. His eyes burned. Not from smoke. The radio crackled. A voice from JSOC headquarters, tinny and distant. Summit Ridge, confirm your previous transmission. Did you say 3,200 meters? Thorson picked up the handset. His voice came out rough. Confirmed, 3,200 meters. Combat conditions. Kill shot. Enemy Supreme Commander. Silence on the other end. 5 seconds. 10. Then, Jesus Christ, who took that shot? Thorson looked at the name on the report. The name every man on this firebase had laughed at 24 hours ago. Corporal Marin Whitlock, he said. The girl we told to put the rifle down. March 15th, 2024, 0300 hours. The C-130's rear ramp dropped at 0300, and the cold hit like a fist to the throat. Marin stepped off the aircraft into the darkness of Firebase Summit Ridge, Colorado Rockies, elevation 9,200 feet, and stopped. The air was thin up here, sharp, the kind of cold that got into your lungs and stayed there. She could smell diesel fuel, burnt coffee, and something metallic, maybe old brass, maybe old blood. At elevation like this, sounds carry different. She could hear generators humming 200 meters away, voices, laughter, the low rumble of men who thought they owned this mountain. 6 snipers had walked off that ramp. 5 of them carried their rifles slung across their backs. Casual, loose, the way men carry weapons when they've carried them long enough to forget they're there. Marin carried hers in a hard case, both hands, like it was something sacred. She was small, 5'6", 128 pounds, dark brown hair pulled tight in a regulation bun, gray-blue eyes that didn't look away when men stared at her, which they always did. Not because she was beautiful, though some might call her that if they bothered to look past the uniform. They stared because she was wrong, a glitch in a system that had been running the same code for 200 years. She'd been 7 years old when her mother died. Lung cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to burial. She remembered sitting beside the hospital bed, holding her mother's hand, feeling it grow colder and colder until it wasn't a hand anymore, just a shape. Her father couldn't handle it, drank himself to death 3 years later. That's when she went to live with Royce Whitlock, her grandfather, the man who taught her that grief was just another form of weight, and weight could be carried, had to be carried, because the alternative was lying down and never getting up. He'd handed her the Remington 700 6 months after she arrived, said, "Your mama was tough, tougher than me, tougher than your daddy. You got her in you. Now let's see if you got me too." She'd hit every target that day, and every day after. Master Chief Gabriel Thorson stood at the bottom of the ramp with a clipboard and a flashlight. He was 43 years old and looked like he'd been carved out of the mountain itself. Deep lines cut into a face that had seen too much sun and too much war. Gray threaded through his hair at the temples. His eyes were the color of winter sky. He'd been running Firebase Summit Ridge for 3 weeks. 2 recon teams had vanished in the valley below. Convoys had been getting shredded for months. And now JSOC was telling him to hold this position for 96 hours while a SEAL extraction team pulled a high-value asset through the southern corridor. If the firebase fell, the corridor closed. If the corridor closed, the asset died. And if the asset died, every operator in the extraction team died with him. Thorson needed killers. He needed snipers who'd stack bodies in Fallujah and Ramadi and Kandahar. Men who'd pulled triggers when it mattered and didn't lose sleep afterward. He looked at the manifest, read the names, stopped on the last one. Whitlock, M, Corporal, Sniper Support Element. He looked up, counted 5 beards, 5 sets of worn boots, 5 men with 1,000-yard stares and shoulders that carried invisible weight, and 1 woman. Thorson's jaw tightened. He turned to Senior Chief Wade Garrison, his lead sniper, a man who'd been shooting people for the United States government for 16 years. "They sent us a female sniper," Thorson said quietly. His voice carried no judgment, just exhaustion. "Outstanding." Garrison didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He just stared at Marin the way a surgeon stares at a broken instrument, already calculating how much damage it could do. "Which one of you is Whitlock?" Garrison called out. His voice cut across the tarmac like a whip crack. Marin stepped forward. The 5 men beside her shifted, not away from her exactly, but enough. Enough to make it clear she was separate, other. "I'm Whitlock, Senior Chief." Her voice was steady, not loud, not soft, just there, like bedrock. Garrison crossed his arms. He was tall, lean, with gray at his temples, and hands that were steady enough to thread a needle at 500 meters. Red-brown beard, green eyes that had seen things those eyes would carry forever. He looked at Marin's boots first, brand new, then her uniform, clean, pressed, then her face, 24 years old, the kind of face that hadn't been broken yet by the things this war did to people. "Your file says you topped the sniper course," Garrison said. "Congratulations. That paper means real steel starts flying." He waited. This was the test, the first one. Every new sniper who'd ever walked onto Garrison's firebase had gotten this exact speech, and every single one had responded the same way, with some version of bravado, some chest-pounding declaration that they were ready for the real thing. "I agree, Senior Chief," Marin said. Garrison's jaw tightened. That wasn't the answer he expected. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't submission. It was something that made him uncomfortable precisely because he couldn't categorize it. "Get her settled," he told Thorson. "Sector 6. And there it was. Every firebase has a Sector 6, the dead zone, the position farthest from expected contact, the place where you put the operator you don't trust with anything important, the place where you stick the person you want out of the way, where they can't hurt anyone, including themselves. Everyone on that firebase knew what Sector 6 meant, including Marin. Her fire team leader was waiting for her at the western perimeter. Petty Officer First Class Jonas Kane, 38 years old, built like a fire hydrant with a shrapnel scar running from his left ear to the corner of his jaw. He'd earned that scar in Helmand Province, along with a Bronze Star, 2 Purple Hearts, and a deep, permanent suspicion of anyone who hadn't earned theirs. Kane looked at Marin the way a man looks at a flat tire. Not angry, just annoyed at the inconvenience. "Here's how this works," he said without preamble. "Watch your lane, don't touch anything, call everything in, and for the love of God, do not fire without my direct authorization. We clear?" "Crystal clear, Petty Officer." "Good. Your position is the western flank. Overlooks the ravine. Nothing's come through there in 3 weeks. Probably nothing will. But you watch it anyway." "Roger that." He started walking. She followed. Behind them, voices carried in the thin mountain air. "You see the new one? Diversity hire. Has to be. Put the rifle down, girl. You'll hurt yourself." A bark of laughter. Then another voice, quieter but sharp enough to cut. "Give her the radio watch. At least she can answer calls." Marin heard every word. Every syllable landed exactly where it was aimed. She'd been hearing versions of those words for 4 years, since the day she showed up at the Special Operations Sniper Course. The only woman in a class of 42. Since the day she qualified first in her class, and the lead instructor told the review board it was statistical noise. Since the morning she outshot a 10-year instructor at 1,200 meters in a crosswind, and he told everyone she got lucky with the wind call. 4 years of being the best in the room and being told she was a fluke. She didn't respond. She never responded. Not because she was afraid to, but because responding meant she thought their opinion mattered. And Royce Whitlock had taught her better than that. "Words are just wind, Marin. Can't nobody argue with a bullet that hits what it's aimed at." Sector 6 was exactly what Kane had promised. A fighting position carved into the western slope, overlooking a ravine that cut through the valley floor like a scar. Sandbags stacked chest high, a narrow firing aperture, 2 ammo crates for seats. The kind of position you give to someone you want forgotten. Marin set down her rifle case and opened it. The MK-13 Mod 7 lay inside like a sleeping predator. Black, precise, beautiful in the way that tools of death can be beautiful when they're maintained with care that borders on obsessive. She'd put 3,000 rounds through this weapon in training. She'd bought her own cleaning kit, her own ballistic calculator. She'd memorized wind tables the way other people memorize song lyrics. While other snipers played poker between qualifications, she was running numbers, calculating holds, building muscle memory that went beyond the physical and into something almost spiritual. Not to prove anything, because she refused, absolutely refused, to be the reason someone didn't come home. "You always this quiet?" The voice belonged to Petty Officer 3rd Class Liam Brennick. 21 years old, blonde hair that stuck up in the back no matter how much he pressed it down. Wide blue eyes that hadn't seen enough yet to learn how to hide what they felt. First deployment, Ohio boy. She could tell by the way he held his weapon. Proper, textbook, but without the unconscious adjustments that came from experience. He was terrified, and trying hard not to show it. "I talk when I have something to say," Marin replied. "Fair enough. I'm Brennick. Liam. Most guys call me Brennick." He sat down on an ammo crate, realized it was stupid, stood back up. "Look, I don't care what they're saying back there. I'm just glad we got another rifle on the line." She looked at him, really looked, saw something she recognized. Not courage exactly, but willingness. The willingness to be proven wrong about what he thought he knew. That was rare. That was worth something. Thanks, Brennick. The fourth member of their fire team was Petty Officer Second Class Nolan Drexler. He arrived without introduction, found his position, set up his gear, and sat down. Mid-30s, dark hair going silver at the temples, eyes that tracked everything and revealed nothing. He nodded at Marin, not warm, not cold, just acknowledgement. Then he began glassing the ravine with his spotting scope. Drexler was a watcher. Marin recognized the type because she was one too. He'd already counted every fighting position on the firebase, noted every gap in the perimeter wire, probably calculated 3 different escape routes. He didn't talk because he was too busy seeing, and what he saw, he kept to himself. Marin picked up her scope and began building her range card. This was the part no one talked about in sniper school recruitment videos. The quiet work, the meticulous, unglamorous, invisible labor of learning a piece of ground so thoroughly that you could read it like a page of text. Every fold in the terrain, every shadow that moved differently than the ones beside it, every rock that could hide a man, every ridge that could mask a machine gun. Marin started at close range and worked outward. 50 meters, the wire, standard triple-strand concertina, gap of approximately 8 inches between second and third strand on the northern post. Not enough for a man to slip through, but enough to note. 100 meters, first rock line, natural defensive barrier, good cover for defending, also good cover for attacking if someone got that far. 200 meters, dry creek bed cutting across the ravine floor. Seasonal runoff channel, currently empty, but the path would funnel movement. Anyone using it would be channelized, predictable. 320 meters, she stopped. A shelf of exposed granite on the eastern slope, angled at roughly 40 degrees, partially concealed by a boulder field. The angle was perfect, the cover was natural, and from that position, if you put a heavy weapon there, a mounted machine gun, a recoilless rifle, anything with sustained firepower, you could pour enfilade fire directly into sectors 3 and 4. The angle was perfect because it was oblique. Sectors 3 and 4 would never see it coming. The boulder field masked the position from the east. But from Sector 6, from the dead zone, from the useless flank where they put people they didn't trust, you could see it perfectly. Marin pulled out her notebook, drew the position, calculated angles, checked sight lines, wrote down every detail. 320 meters, granite shelf, 40-degree angle, boulder field masking, perfect HW position, enfilade S3/S4. She stood and walked to Kane. Petty Officer, I've identified a potential heavy weapon position at 320 meters on the eastern slope. Rocky shelf below the boulder field. Clear enfilade angle on sectors 3 and 4. Recommend we flag it for the defensive plan. Kane didn't look up from his MRE. That's outside our sector. I understand it's outside our sector, but if someone puts a gun there, Whitlock, stay in your lane. She stood there for 2 seconds, then 3. She could feel Brennick watching from his position. Drexler too, though he'd never admit it. Roger, Petty Officer, staying in my lane. She went back to her scope, back to her range card, back to the quiet, thankless work of seeing what no one else wanted to see. But she wrote it down, every detail, the shelf, the angles, the kill zone it would create. She logged it in her notebook with the same precision she applied to everything. Because if she was right, that notebook might be the difference between a firebase that held and a firebase that fell. 2 hours later, she noticed something else. The ravine floor, 400 meters out, just below the second rock line. The vegetation was wrong. Not wrong in a way that would jump out at someone scanning casually, but wrong in a way that screamed at a trained eye. Broken branches bent the wrong direction. Scrub brush flattened in a pattern that wasn't wind or animal traffic. And there, barely visible, almost invisible, but absolutely there, boot prints, fresh ones. The soil disturbance was too clean, too defined to be more than 48 hours old. Someone had been down in that ravine recently, scouting. She logged it. Detailed notes, grid coordinates, direction of travel, estimated timeline based on soil compression and vegetation recovery. Then she went to Kane again. Petty officer, I've got evidence of recent foot traffic in the ravine. Within 48 hours, someone's been scouting our position. Kane looked up this time. His expression wasn't dismissive. It was tired. The particular kind of tired that came from 23 years of new operators reporting every shadow as a threat. The ravine gets local traffic, goat herders, smugglers. It's been quiet for 3 weeks. These aren't goat herder tracks, petty officer. The tread pattern is military. The spacing suggests a deliberate pace count, and the path follows a surveillance route. High points with direct observation of our western and southern perimeter. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in Kane's eyes. Not quite belief, but not quite dismissal either. Then he shook his head. Log it and keep watching. She went back. She kept watching. At midday, the sun was high enough to catch anything reflective in the valley below. Marin was scanning her sector in a slow, methodical sweep. Left to right, near to far, the way Royce had taught her on the ranch. When something flashed at 560 meters, brief, a fraction of a second, sunlight hitting glass or polished metal, and then gone. She locked her scope on the position, a cluster of boulders on the far side of the valley, partially screened by scrub brush. She watched. 30 seconds, 60 seconds, nothing moved. Then, there, a shift in the shadow pattern behind the second boulder. Subtle, almost nothing. But almost nothing is not nothing. Human movement. She keyed the radio. Sector 6, observation report. Possible enemy observation post at 560 meters, bearing 275. Brief flash consistent with optics or reflective equipment. Possible human movement in shadow. Kane picked up his binoculars, scanned the position. 10 seconds. 20. I don't see anything, Whitlock. Heat mirage. Sun's playing tricks at that range. Stay focused on your sector. She didn't argue. She never argued. But she kept her scope on that boulder cluster for another 15 minutes. And in that time, she saw the shadow shift twice more. It wasn't a mirage. It wasn't the sun. Someone was sitting behind those rocks with optics of their own. And they were watching Firebase Summit Ridge with the patience of a predator that already knew when it was going to strike. The afternoon dragged by. Temperature dropped from 23 degrees Fahrenheit at dawn to 18 degrees by 1400 hours. Wind picked up from the east, 15 miles per hour, gusting to 25. Brennick pulled his jacket tighter, blew on his hands. Jesus, my fingers are going numb. Drexler didn't respond, just kept glassing the valley. Marin sat perfectly still. No shivering, no visible discomfort. She'd unzipped her jacket halfway. Her hands were bare on the rifle. Brennick stared at her. Aren't you cold? I'm fine. It's 18 degrees. I know. Your jacket's open. I know. He shook his head, pulled out a medical thermometer from his pack. Here, humor me. Check your temp. If you're going hypothermic, we need to know. Marin took the thermometer, placed it under her tongue, waited 60 seconds. Pulled it out. 96.8 degrees Fahrenheit. She showed it to Brennick. His eyes went wide. That's not right. Normal is 98.6. You're 2 degrees low. I know. That's hypothermia. It's not hypothermia for me. Marin handed back the thermometer. I don't feel cold the way others do. Never have. Drexler turned from his spotting scope for the first time in 3 hours. How long have you been like that? Always, since I was born. She paused. My grandfather noticed it when I was 7. Took me to doctors. They ran tests. No medical explanation. Body just runs cold. Always has. Brennick was still staring at the thermometer. That's really weird. It's useful. Marin settled back behind her rifle. Cold weather ops don't bother me. I can stay on a scope longer than most, and she hesitated, deciding how much to say. And what? Drexler asked. His voice was quiet, interested. Thermal imaging doesn't pick me up as well. Not when my core temp drops this low. I blend into the background signature. Brennick blinked. Wait, you're saying you're invisible to thermal optics? Not invisible, just harder to see, like static in the signal. Drexler stared at her for a long moment. Does Garrison know about this? It's in my medical file. Whether he read it, she shrugged. Drexler nodded slowly, turned back to his scope, said nothing else. But Marin saw something shift in his posture, the way he positioned himself, like he just recalculated the odds of survival and found them slightly better than before. 1,800 hours, sunset approaching. The wind had been shifting all day. Marin had tracked it, not with instruments, with her ears. She sat perfectly still, eyes closed, head slightly tilted, listening. What are you doing? Brennick asked. Listening to the wind. For what? Direction, speed, vector. You can hear that? I can hear the frequency. Wind makes sound. Different speeds, different frequencies. You learn to distinguish them. Brennick glanced at Drexler. Drexler was watching Marin now, both of them. What do you hear? Drexler asked. Marin opened her eyes. 42 hertz from the east, 58 hertz from the west. Cross-pressure system. The eastern flow is weakening, western flow strengthening. Direction will shift in approximately 4 hours. By 2200, we'll have a sustained westerly at 20 to 30 miles per hour. Drexler pulled out a small weather station, checked the barometric pressure, wind direction, did some mental calculations, looked at Marin. You're right. How the hell did you know that? My grandfather taught me. Royce Whitlock, Marine Force Recon. He could read weather by sound. Taught me when I was 8 years old. Took 6 years before I could hear it consistently. Hear what? Brennick said. I don't hear anything except wind. That's because you're listening for words, Marin said. Wind doesn't talk. It sings. Different speeds create different frequencies. Low frequencies, high frequencies, harmonics, interference patterns. You learn to hear the music. You can read the wind better than any instrument. Drexler was shaking his head. I've been shooting for 13 years. Worked with snipers all over the world. Never heard anyone do that. Most people can't. I don't know why I can. Grandfather could. Said it was a gift. Called it reading the invisible. Said some people are born with one sense stronger than others. Mine is sound. She paused. Useful for a sniper. Useful? Brennick laughed. It came out too high. Nervous. That's not useful. That's like superpowers or something. It's not superpowers, it's just paying attention to things other people ignore. Marin pulled her rifle closer. Wind is always talking. Most people just never learn to listen. Drexler stared at her for another long moment. Then he did something surprising. He smiled. Just a small one, the corner of his mouth. I'm glad you're in my sector, he said quietly. Kane's voice cut across the position. Drexler, Whitlock, briefing in 5, move. The briefing was held in the Tactical Operations Center, a plywood shelter dug into the hillside, reinforced with sandbags in corrugated metal. Thorson stood at a tactical map of the valley, Garrison beside him. Kane entered with Drexler and Marin. Status report, Thorson said. Sector 6. Kane stepped forward. No contact, no movement. Sector remains quiet. Whitlock filed 3 observation reports today, Garrison said. He was reading from a tablet. Want to brief us on those, Corporal? All eyes turned to Marin. She stood at attention. Yes, Senior Chief. 3 items. First, I've identified a potential heavy weapon position at 320 meters on the eastern slope. Granite shelf with boulder masking. Clear enfilade on sectors 3 and 4. Recommend flagging for defensive plan. Thorson studied the map. That's outside Sector 6's area of responsibility. Yes, Master Chief, but the sight line is only visible from Sector 6. Other positions are masked by terrain. Garrison frowned. You're saying we missed this in our defensive survey? I'm saying the angle only reveals itself from the western flank, Senior Chief. A long pause. Thorson and Garrison exchanged glances. Noted, Thorson said. What else? Second, evidence of recent foot traffic in the ravine. Boot prints, military tread pattern, within 48 hours. Tread spacing and path suggest deliberate reconnaissance of our western and southern perimeter. Kane shifted his weight. Master Chief, the ravine gets local traffic regularly. Goat herders, smugglers. Hasn't been hostile activity in that area for 3 weeks. Marin didn't contradict him, didn't speak, just waited. Thorson looked at her. Do you agree with Petty Officer Kane's assessment, Corporal? No, Master Chief. The room went quiet. Why not? Because goat herders don't wear Solomon tactical boots, and smugglers don't conduct systematic surveillance of military positions. Garrison's jaw tightened. You're sure about the tread pattern? Yes, Senior Chief. I photographed it with my optic camera. Can provide imagery for analysis. Another pause. Thorson made a note. We'll review. Third item? Possible enemy observation post at 560 meters, bearing 275. Boulder cluster on the valley's eastern wall. I observed reflective flash consistent with optical equipment and human movement in shadow. Kane spoke before Garrison could. Master Chief, I glassed that position. Saw nothing. Likely heat mirage. Sun creates optical distortions at range. I watched the position for 15 minutes after the initial flash, Marin said. Observed shadow movement 3 times. Movement pattern consistent with human surveillance, not thermal distortion. Garrison set down his tablet. Corporal Whitlock, you've been on this firebase for 12 hours. You've identified 3 threats that our experienced operators haven't seen in 3 weeks. Do you find that statistically likely? Marin met his eyes. I find it statistically likely that my position offers sight lines other positions don't have, Senior Chief, and I find it likely that I was trained to see things others might miss. Or, Garrison said, his voice hardening, you're a brand new operator seeing threats that don't exist because you're nervous on your first deployment. I'm not nervous, Senior Chief. Then you're overcompensating, trying to prove something. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm reporting what I saw. The room crackled with tension. Thorson raised a hand. Enough. Whitlock, I appreciate your vigilance. We'll note your reports. But understand that we've been holding this firebase for 3 weeks without incident. The area has been quiet. We assess the threat level as low for the next 96 hours. Master Chief. Dismissed, Corporal. Marin snapped to attention. Aye, Master Chief. She turned and walked out. Drexler followed. As the door closed behind them, she heard Garrison's voice. Thorson, we need to talk about that placement. Sector 6 is dead quiet. We don't need a rookie stirring up phantom threats. The door closed. 2200 hours. Night watch. Marin strapped on her night vision. The world went green and grainy. Shadows became shapes. Shapes became questions. She could feel it now, not see it, not hear it, feel it. The valley was different after dark. The silence was too complete. No animal movement, no insect noise, nothing. When a valley goes silent, it means something bigger than you has moved in. She thought about Wyoming, about the ranch, about the night the coyotes stopped howling and Royce Whitlock had gotten up from his chair, walked to the gun cabinet, and loaded his rifle without saying a word. When the land goes quiet, Marin, it's because something bad is coming. The animals know before we do. Trust the silence. She trusted it now. Drexler, she said quietly. Yeah. You hear anything? Wildlife? He stopped, listened. 30 seconds of complete attention. No, nothing. Valley's dead quiet. Has it been like that other nights? No, usually hear owls, sometimes coyotes, not tonight. They looked at each other in the green glow of night vision. Something's wrong, Marin said. Drexler nodded slowly. Yeah, something is. He didn't report it, neither did she. Because how do you report the absence of sound? How do you quantify the feeling that the mountain is holding its breath? Midnight. Marin pulled out her grandfather's compass. Brass, worn smooth from 30 years of handling. He'd carried it through Desert Storm, pressed it into her hand the day she left for sniper school. She didn't need it for navigation. She carried it because it reminded her who she was, where she came from. A ranch girl from Wyoming who could shoot the wings off a fly at 500 meters. A woman in a world that didn't want her. A sniper who saw what others refused to see. 0100. Brennick fell asleep at his position. Drexler woke him with a boot to the leg. Quiet. No drama, no report. Just a veteran keeping a kid alive without making it a thing. 0200. The valley was still silent. Too silent. Marin adjusted her night vision and scanned the ravine one more time. And there, at the edge of her range, moving with a discipline that made her blood go cold, she saw shadows that didn't belong to the terrain. Not one, not two, dozens. They were coming. Not in ones and twos, not in a patrol-sized element feeling their way forward. They were massing. Moving through the dead ground she'd identified 12 hours ago, using the exact approach route she'd plotted in her notebook, heading for the exact positions she'd warned Kane about. She reached for the radio and stopped, because Kane had told her to stay in her lane. Thorson had dismissed her reports. Garrison had put her in the dead zone. Every voice on this firebase had told her the same thing. Sit down, shut up, let the real operators handle it. She could report it, and they would tell her it was heat mirage. They would tell her it was goat herders. They would tell her to stay in her lane. Or she could do exactly what her grandfather taught her. Trust what she saw. Trust what she knew. And be ready when the world caught fire. Marin Whitlock tightened her grip on the MK-13, settled her eye against the scope, and waited for the war to come to her. 0245. The valley held its breath. Marin whispered into the darkness. They're here. Brennick stirred. What? Wake up, they're here. How do you know? Marin's voice was steady, certain, final. Because I can't hear the birds anymore. And then the world exploded. At 0245, the first RPG hit Sector 3's machine gun nest and turned it into a grave. No warning, no probing fire, no single shot from a nervous insurgent testing the perimeter. 1 second the firebase was silent, and the next second it was dying. 3 simultaneous explosions ripped through the eastern flank, perfectly timed, perfectly placed, hitting the exact positions that would cause maximum damage in the first 5 seconds. Whoever planned this assault had studied Firebase Summit Ridge the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. They knew where every sandbag sat. They knew where every gun pointed. They knew every blind spot, every weakness, every gap in the wire. And Marin knew how they knew, because she'd seen the scout in the ravine. She'd seen the observer at 560 meters. She'd reported both. And both reports were sitting in a logbook that nobody had read. Contact! All sectors! We are under heavy assault! Master Chief Thorson's voice exploded across the radio. And for the first time since she'd arrived, the Master Chief sounded like a man who wasn't sure he was going to survive the next 60 seconds. Marin rolled into her firing position before the echo of the first explosion died. Cheek to stock, eye to scope, the night vision optic turned the world into a green nightmare. Muzzle flashes everywhere. The ravine, the eastern slope, the tree line, the boulder field. Tracers cut through the darkness like burning needles, crisscrossing the firebase in patterns that weren't random. They were coordinated. Suppressive fire on sectors 1 and 2 to keep heads down. Concentrated fire on sectors 3 and 4 to break through. Professional, disciplined, terrifying. She started counting muzzle flashes. 10, 20, 40, 60. She stopped counting at 100 and started estimating. The flashes stretched across a front that was wider than anything the firebase's defensive plan had anticipated. "Brennick," she said. Her voice was calm. "Ice. How many do you see?" He was flat on his stomach, rifle up, eyes the size of silver dollars. I can't. There's too many." "Take a breath. Count the flashes in your sector, left to right. Count." He forced himself to look, forced himself to count. "I see 40, maybe 50, just in the ravine." Drexler. Drexler was already on his spotting scope, sweeping the eastern slope with the calm efficiency of a man who'd done this before. "I've got 100 plus on the east, two distinct assault lines. They're moving in bounds, fire and maneuver. These aren't farmers with AKs." "No," Marin said quietly. "These are trained. At least 250 fighters, moving with coordination that spoke of weeks of rehearsal, hitting a firebase that had 63 defenders and had just lost its primary machine gun position in the first 3 seconds. The radio was chaos, every sector screaming at once. Thorson trying to establish order, Garrison calling for illumination rounds. Someone in Sector 4 shouting that they were flanked. Where were they coming from? Marin blocked it out, all of it. The screaming, the explosions, the crackling roar of 100 weapons firing at once. She let the noise become white static and focused her entire being into the 12-inch circle of her scope. And there he was, 240 meters, moving fast between two rock formations, an enemy fire team leader. She could tell by the way the men around him responded to his hand signals, by the way he moved with purpose while others moved with fear. He was directing a flanking element of 15 fighters towards Sector 4's exposed left side, the same side Marin had identified as vulnerable when she'd mapped the terrain 12 hours ago. Easy shot, textbook range, no wind at this distance. She could hit a playing card at 240 meters in her sleep. "I have a target," she said. "Fire team leader, 240 meters, directing a flanking maneuver towards Sector 4. Request permission to engage." Kane was pressed against the rock wall, radio in one hand, weapon in the other. His face was a mask of controlled fear, the kind of fear that experienced operators learn to wear like armor. Afraid, yes, but functional. "Negative," he snapped. "Sector 6 is observation only. You fire, you give away our position." "Petty officer, he's leading a flanking force directly into Sector 4's blind side. If that element reaches—" "I said negative, Whitlock. Observe and report. That is your mission." She watched through her scope. The fire team leader raised his arm. The flanking element surged forward, 15 men moving through dead ground that Sector 4 couldn't see, toward a position that Sector 4 couldn't defend, at an angle that Sector 4 didn't know existed. "Sector 4, be advised," Marin transmitted. "Enemy flanking force, 15 personnel, approaching your left side through the rock field. 30 seconds to contact." "Where? I don't see—" The flanking element hit Sector 4 like a hammer. The sound was different when men were surprised. Not the steady rhythm of a prepared defense, but the ragged, desperate staccato of people spinning to face a threat they didn't know was there. Marin heard it through her headset. The sharp crack of weapons fired at point-blank range, the heavy thud of grenades, and then the screaming. "Sector 4 is hit. We're flanked. 3 men down. We need—" The transmission cut off. Static. Marin's finger rested on the trigger guard. Not the trigger, the guard. 2 inches from ending the fire team leader's life. 2 inches she wasn't authorized to cross. "Petty officer," she said. Her voice was level, but something underneath it was vibrating like a wire pulled too tight. "Men are dying. Hold your fire. They are dying right now because that fire team leader is alive. I can change that in 1 second." And if you fire, every fighter in that ravine knows where we are. 4 of us against 250. We last about 2 minutes. He wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. Tactically, operationally, by every measure of doctrinal correctness, Jonas Kane was not wrong. Sector 6 was a 4-person position with no reinforcement capability. If they drew attention, they'd be overwhelmed. But doctrine didn't account for 9 men bleeding out 50 meters away because a fire team leader was directing traffic unopposed. Marin watched the flanking element push deeper into Sector 4. Another explosion. More screaming. The position was being torn apart. She said nothing, kept her eye on the scope, kept her finger on the guard, kept breathing the way her grandfather taught her. Slow, steady, controlled. Even though everything inside her was screaming to pull that trigger and to hell with the consequences. Drexler shifted beside her. "She's right, Kane." His voice was barely audible over the gunfire. "Sector 4 is getting overrun. I know what's happening." "Then let her shoot and get us all killed? That's your plan?" "They're already dying. At least give us a say in who." Kane's jaw clenched so tight Marin could see the muscles jumping under his scar. He was trapped, caught between protocol and reality, between the rules that kept operators alive and the truth that those rules were killing people right now. Then it got worse. A sound that Marin felt in her chest before she heard it through her ears. A deep, mechanical roar. Engine noise. Heavy diesel. Coming up the eastern slope. She swung her scope right and her stomach dropped. A technical vehicle. A Toyota Hilux with a mounted DSHK heavy machine gun. The kind that could cut a man in half at 500 meters. Grinding up the rocky slope toward the shelf at 320 meters. The exact shelf she'd flagged in her report. The exact position she'd identified as a potential heavy weapon platform with perfect enfilade on sectors 3 and 4. The truck reached the shelf. Stopped. The gunner racked the charging handle. "No," Marin whispered. "No, no, no." The DSHK opened fire. The sound was apocalyptic. Not the sharp crack of rifles or the dull thump of RPGs. A continuous, thundering roar that shook the air itself. The heavy rounds tore into Sector 3's fighting positions like a chainsaw through plywood. Sandbags exploded into clouds of dust. Rock walls that had stopped rifle fire for 3 weeks disintegrated under 12.7 millimeter rounds designed to destroy vehicles. Not men. Men screamed. That was the sound Marin would remember for the rest of her life. Not the gun, not the explosions, but the screaming. Human voices hitting frequencies that vocal cords aren't designed to reach. The sound of bodies being torn open. "Sector 3 is taking heavy casualties. The gun! There's a gun on the ridge. We can't. Sector 4, 2 more KIA. That machine gun is cutting us apart." "That shelf," Marin said. Not to anyone, to the universe, to the gods she wasn't sure she believed in, to the empty air where her warning had gone 12 hours ago. "The one I marked." Kane heard her. His face was white, not pale, white. The color of a man watching the consequences of his own decision stack up in body bags. The DSHK swung towards Sector 4. The gunner walked his rounds across the position with mechanical precision. Left to right. Pause. Right to left. Systematic. Patient. The kind of shooting that told Marin this wasn't the gunner's first night behind a heavy weapon. "Can anyone get an angle on that technical?" Thorson's voice on the radio. Not commanding now, pleading. Sector 3 was pinned flat. The survivors couldn't raise their heads without catching 50 caliber rounds. Sector 4 was shattered. Half their men were dead or wounded. The rest pressed into whatever cover they could find. Sector 2 reported they couldn't traverse their weapons far enough south without exposing their entire position to the eastern assault line. Nobody could hit that technical. Nobody had the angle. Nobody except Sector 6. Marin looked at Kane. Kane looked at Marin. The DSHK fired another burst. Someone screamed so loud it distorted the radio speaker. "I can take the shot," she said. The words hung between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. "You are not authorized," Kane said. But his voice had changed. The command authority was cracking. Underneath it, she could hear the thing he was really saying. Not, "You are not authorized," but, "I'm terrified that if I let you shoot and you miss, we all die." "Petty officer, they're dying." Another burst from the DSHK, an explosion in Sector 4. Direct hit on a fighting position. The radio filled with a sound that Marin couldn't identify for a moment, and then realized was a man crying. Not screaming, crying. The quiet, broken sound of someone who just watched his friend die beside him and couldn't process it. Kane stared at her. His eyes were wild, but his mind was working. She could see it, the calculations running behind his fear. If she fired, Sector 6 was exposed. If she didn't fire, Sectors 3 and 4 were destroyed. If Sectors 3 and 4 fell, the firebase's eastern perimeter collapsed. If the perimeter collapsed, 250 fighters poured through. If they poured through, the extraction route was cut. If the route was cut, the SEAL team and the asset died in the southern corridor. Everything led to the same place. Everything funneled down to this moment, this position, this woman with her eye on a scope and her finger 2 inches from a trigger. "Can you make that shot?" Kane whispered. "Yes." Not, "I think so." Not, "I'll try." Not, "probably." Yes. One syllable. The most honest word she'd ever spoken. Kane grabbed his radio. His hand was shaking. His voice wasn't. "Thorson, Sector 6. We have a shooter who says she can hit that technical. 320 meters, rocky shelf, eastern slope." A pause. Gunfire. Screaming. Then Thorson. "She? The new sniper?" "Corporal Whitlock. Yes, Master Chief." Longer pause. Marin could hear Thorson thinking, could feel the weight of his hesitation through the radio waves. He was the firebase commander. 9 men were already dead or dying. The eastern defense was collapsing, and the only solution being offered came from the one person on his firebase that he dismissed as irrelevant 18 hours ago. "How confident is she?" Kane looked at Marin. She looked back at him. Steady, unblinking. "She says she can make it, Master Chief." The DSHK fired again, a sound like wet fabric tearing. That was what a heavy round did to a human body at 300 meters. Marin heard it and felt something inside her go very still, very cold, very clear. "Permission granted," Thorson said. "Take the shot, Whitlock, and God help us if you miss." Kane pulled the radio away from his face. "You heard the man." Marin settled behind the MK-13. The world shrank. The noise faded. The chaos, the fire, the screaming, all of it pulled back like a tide going out, leaving only the clean, cold silence of the scope. 320 meters, uphill angle, 12 degrees, crosswind from the west, 4 miles per hour, enough to push the round 2 inches at this range. The gunner was standing behind the DSHK, leaning into the weapon, firing in controlled bursts. She could see his hands on the spade grips, could see his shoulders absorbing the recoil, could see the belt of ammunition feeding from the can on the truck bed. He was reloading. New belt. 5 seconds before he fired again. She had 5 seconds. Her breathing slowed, not consciously. Her body did it on its own, the way it had been trained to do through 3,000 rounds and 1,000 hours of practice. Her heartbeat dropped. She could feel each beat as a separate event, a small rhythmic pulse that she'd learned to shoot between. 2 breaths. 1 breath. The pause. This isn't about gender. This isn't about respect. This isn't about politics or diversity or whether a woman belongs behind a rifle. Men are dying. She can stop it. Everything else is noise. She squeezed the trigger. The MK-13 kicked against her shoulder. The round left the barrel at 2,600 feet per second. At 320 meters, It arrived in less than half a second. The gunner's head snapped back. His hands released the spade grips. His body folded backward over the truck bed like a puppet with cut strings. He hit the ground behind the truck and didn't move. The DSHK went silent. For 3 seconds, the entire battlefield held its breath. 3 seconds that felt like the entire world paused to understand what had just happened. Nobody fired. Not the enemy, not the firebase. Every gun on that mountain stopped, as if the war itself needed a moment to comprehend. "Target down," Marin said. "Gunner is KIA." The silence broke. A second fighter, she could see him scrambling out of the truck's cab, lunged for the machine gun. His hands found the grips. He started to swing the barrel toward Sector 3. She fired again. The round caught him in the chest. He spun sideways and fell off the truck. Second target down, technical neutralized. Kane was staring at her. Brennick was staring at her. On the radio, someone was saying something, but the words weren't landing because everyone on the net was trying to talk at once. Drexler, behind his spotting scope, said one word: clean. That's when it started. Not the doubt, not the fear, the other thing. The thing that happens when a weapon you didn't believe in suddenly proves itself, and the enemy knows it. The tactical frequency changed. The energy shifted. Sectors 3 and 4 were still bleeding, still broken, but the killing machine that had been carving them apart was dead, and the men who were still alive knew they had a chance now, because someone in Sector 6 could shoot. Marin didn't celebrate, didn't breathe, didn't blink. She shifted her scope 2 degrees left and found the fire team leader at 250 meters, the same man she'd requested permission to engage 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes and 3 dead Americans ago. He was crouched behind a boulder, screaming into a radio, trying to rally his flanking force for another push into Sector 4. She put the crosshairs on his chest, exhaled, fired. He pitched forward into the dirt. His radio bounced off the rock and tumbled down the slope. 3 confirmed. Fire team leader neutralized. "Sector 4, the pressure's easing," someone shouted. "The flanking force is pulling back." Then a spotter. She found him at 370 meters. A man with binoculars crouched behind a fallen tree, calling corrections for a mortar team she hadn't located yet. He was talking into a handset, gesturing towards Sector 2, directing the next barrage. "Wind compensation at 370. Half-mil adjustment right." She fired. The spotter collapsed. The handset fell. Somewhere behind the ridge, a mortar tube fired blind. The rounds sailed over the firebase and detonated harmlessly on the far slope. 4 confirmed. Mortar spotter eliminated. The tactical frequency buzzed with a voice she didn't recognize. "Who the hell is shooting?" Garrison answered. And his voice, the voice of the man who'd put her in the dead zone, who'd handed her Sector 6 like it was a punishment, who'd shaken her hand and dismissed her in the same breath, carried something new, something that cost him everything to admit. Sector 6, the new girl, 4 kills in 90 seconds. 4 key targets: the gunner, the replacement gunner, the fire team leader, the mortar spotter, eliminated with 4 rounds. No misses, no wasted ammunition, no hesitation. The enemy advance stalled. Fighters who had been moving with confidence and coordination suddenly dove for cover. They pressed themselves behind rocks. They crawled into depressions. They stopped moving forward because moving forward meant crossing the invisible line where a woman with a rifle could reach them. And nobody wanted to find out where that line ended. They were being hunted, and they knew it. Marin felt the shift in her bones. Not victory. It was far too early for that. But the initiative had swung. The enemy had lost their heavy weapon, their flanking commander, their mortar coordination, and their sense of invulnerability, all in 90 seconds. Now they had to decide, push through the kill zone or regroup and find another way. They chose another way. She heard the mortars before she saw them, not the blind fire from before. This was deliberate, targeted. Someone on the enemy side had figured out where those shots were coming from, and now they were trying to kill the problem at its source. The first round landed 30 meters from Sector 6, close enough to shower them with rocks and dirt, not close enough to kill. But the next one would be closer, and the one after that would be closer still. "Mortars walking rounds toward our position," Kane shouted. The second round hit 15 meters out. The concussion slammed Marin's chest like a fist. Dust filled her scope. She blinked, wiped the lens, got back on the glass. "Whitlock, get down!" Kane grabbed her shoulder. She shrugged him off. The third round hit 8 meters away. Shrapnel whined overhead. A chunk of rock the size of a fist smashed into the wall 2 feet from Brennick's head. He yelped and pressed himself flat. "They want me down, petty officer," Marin said. Her voice was calm. Wrong kind of calm. The calm of a person who had made a decision and was no longer afraid of the consequences. "That's the point. They know I'm the problem. If I stop shooting, they regroup. If they regroup, they hit Sector 3 again. And Sector 3 has nothing left. You can't shoot if you're dead. Then I'd better shoot before they kill me." She scanned the far ridge. The mortar team had to be there, behind the crest, using the reverse slope for cover. She couldn't see the tubes, but she could see the observer, a man standing just below the ridgeline at 620 meters, watching the fall of each round through binoculars, calling adjustments to the crew behind him. 620 meters, dawn wind picking up, uphill angle, cold barrel after 5 rapid shots. The Mk-13's effective range was 1,300 meters, but effective range and combat range were 2 different things. At 620 meters in these conditions, with mortars falling around her, the shot was possible. Barely. She ran the math, not on a calculator, in her head. The way her grandfather had taught her during those endless afternoons on the Wyoming ranch when he'd call distances and wind speeds and make her calculate holds until the numbers lived inside her muscles. Elevation adjustment, windage correction, 3/4 value wind from the left. Coriolis effect negligible at this range, but she accounted for it anyway. Because Marin Whitlock didn't do close enough. Another mortar round hit. 6 meters, the closest yet. Dirt rained down on her back. She felt something hot graze her left arm. Shrapnel or rock? She didn't know and didn't check. "Marin!" Brennick screamed her name. For the first time, not Whitlock, not Corporal, Marin. She fired. 620 meters away, the mortar observer's head snapped back. His binoculars flew from his hands. He toppled backward and disappeared behind the ridgeline. The mortars fired one more round. Wild, uncorrected, 40 meters off target. Then nothing. The tubes went silent. "Mortar team eliminated," she reported. 620 meters. Silence on the radio. The kind of silence that happens when people are recalculating everything they thought they knew. "I didn't know that rifle could reach that far," Brennick muttered. His voice was shaking. His eyes were wet. He was 21 years old, and he was watching a woman do something he'd only read about in training manuals. Drexler pulled his eye from the spotting scope, looked at Brennick, looked at Marin, said 5 words that carried more weight than every report and evaluation and qualification score in her entire service record. "It's not the rifle, it's her." Drexler's words hadn't even finished settling when the ravine moved. Marin caught it in her peripheral vision first. A shadow that shouldn't have been shifting. A pattern of movement that didn't match wind or terrain. She swung her scope down and left, away from the far ridge where the mortar observer's body was still cooling, and found the ravine floor at 380 meters. Her blood went cold. 35 fighters moving single file through the dead ground along the ravine's western wall. Not running, creeping, disciplined, using every fold in the terrain, every shadow, every piece of cover with the precision of men who'd rehearsed this route before tonight. They were invisible to every sector on the firebase. Invisible to Sector 2 because of the angle. Invisible to Sector 3 because Sector 3 barely existed anymore. Invisible to everyone. Because the ravine was a blind spot that nobody had bothered to account for. Nobody except the woman they'd put in the dead zone. All positions, Marin transmitted. Her voice was flat. Ice. The voice of someone who'd moved past fear into the place beyond it. Enemy flanking force. 35-plus personnel moving through the ravine towards Sector 2's rear. Single file, tactical movement, 3 minutes to contact. Sector 2's response was immediate and panicked. We don't see them. Say again. Position. Western ravine floor, 380 meters from my position. They're below your sight line. You won't see them until they're on top of you. How do you know they're? Because I'm looking at them right now. 35 men, armed, moving toward your back door. You have 3 minutes. Thorson cut in. Sector 2, reorient your rear security. Whitlock, can you engage? Already on it. She didn't wait for confirmation. She didn't ask for authorization. The time for asking permission was over. Thorson had given her weapons free, and she was going to use it until someone took it away or she ran out of ammunition. The lead man was 380 meters out, moving at a steady pace, weapon held low, head down. Behind him, the column stretched back into the shadows like a snake sliding through tall grass. If they reached Sector 2's rear, they'd roll through the position from behind. Sector 2 would be destroyed. And with Sectors 3 and 4 already shattered, the entire eastern half of Firebase Summit Ridge would collapse. She took the lead man first. The round hit him center mass. He dropped without a sound. 1 second vertical, the next second on the ground. The man behind him didn't realize what had happened for 2 full seconds. He stepped over the body, kept moving. She fired again. The second man fell on top of the first. Now they knew. The column froze. 33 men caught in single file in a ravine with nowhere to go. For 1 eternal second, nobody moved. Then Marin did something that separated her from every sniper she'd ever trained with. Instead of working front to back, the logical sequence, the textbook approach, she skipped to the rear of the column, found the officer. She knew he was the officer because he was the only man carrying a map case and the only man whose body language said, I give orders, instead of, I follow them. She fired. The officer went down. His map case tumbled into the dirt. The column broke. Without leadership at the front and without command at the rear, 32 fighters were suddenly a mob. Some dove for cover. Some tried to run forward. Some turned around. 2 men collided and fell in a tangle of limbs and weapons. The disciplined, rehearsed flanking maneuver disintegrated into chaos in the space of 4 seconds. Flanking forces disrupted, Marin reported. Lead element and rear commander eliminated. They're scattering. Keep shooting, Thorson said. No hesitation, no doubt. The Master Chief, who'd read her manifest with disappointment 18 hours ago, was now giving her the one order that mattered. She kept shooting. A fighter who'd taken cover behind a boulder and was trying to set up a machine gun. She hit him before he could rack the bolt. Another who broke from the column and sprinted towards Sector 2's perimeter wire. She tracked him for 1 second, led him by a foot, fired. He tumbled and skidded to a stop 20 meters short of the wire. Sector 2, the wire, 20 meters out, 1 down. We see him. We see the rest. They're pulling back. The remnants of the flanking force retreated into the ravine's shadows, disorganized, leaderless, leaving 7 bodies on the ravine floor, 7 more kills, 12 total now. And the flanking attack that would have ended Firebase Summit Ridge was dead on the ground with the men who tried to carry it out. Sector 6, Garrison's voice came through the radio. Different now, stripped of everything except raw, unfiltered honesty. Outstanding shooting, Whitlock. She didn't acknowledge the compliment. She was already scanning for the next threat. Because the enemy had thrown 3 punches, the frontal assault, the technical, the flanking force, and all 3 had been stopped. A commander who'd lost 3 plays had only one option left: Everything. They're regrouping, Drexler said from his spotting scope. His voice had an edge she hadn't heard before. Not fear, urgency. East slope. Both assault lines are merging. They're pulling fighters from the tree line, from the boulder field, from everywhere. They're consolidating. For what? Brennick asked. Drexler looked at Marin. She looked back at him. They both knew. Human wave, she said. What does that mean? They're going to throw every single fighter they have at us at once. No maneuver, no flanking, no tactics, just numbers. They're betting they have more bodies than we have bullets. Brennick's face went the color of old paper. How many? All of them, Drexler said. Every man they've got. The radio crackled, Thorson's voice. And now, for the first time, Marin heard something in it that she'd never expected to hear from a master chief with 20-plus years in special operations. Not fear, acceptance. The quiet, terrible acceptance of a man who understood that the next 10 minutes would determine whether he lived or died, and who had made peace with both outcomes. All sectors, this is Thorson. Intel confirms enemy force consolidating for mass assault. Estimated strength 200-plus fighters. They are going to hit us with everything they have. He paused. The pause lasted 2 heartbeats. When he spoke again, his voice was harder. Not louder, harder. If they break through, the extraction is finished. The SEAL team in the southern corridor dies. The asset dies. Everyone on this firebase dies. There is no reinforcement. There is no air support. There is no cavalry coming over the hill. Another pause. Make every round count. Thorson out. Marin ejected her magazine, counted rounds, loaded a fresh mag. She had 8 magazines remaining, 160 rounds, against 200-plus fighters. She did the math. If she maintained her current hit rate, which she wouldn't, because fatigue and stress and distance were cumulative and nobody shoots perfectly forever, she could eliminate maybe 30 targets before she was empty. 30 out of 200. It wasn't enough. The math didn't work. The math said they were all going to die on this mountain. Marin, Drexler's voice, quiet, steady, using her first name for the first time since they'd met. How's your ammo? 8 mags, 160. I've got 4 mags of match grade in my pack. Take them. That's your ammunition. My rifle doesn't reach what yours does. Take them. He tossed the magazines across the fighting position. She caught them. 4 more magazines, 80 more rounds, 240 total. Brennick, she said, how many rounds? 6 mags, I think. Yeah, 6. You're going to need all of them. Stay on your sector. Anything that gets inside 200 meters, you shoot it. Don't think about range. Don't think about wind. 200 meters. Aim center mass. Pull the trigger. Can you do that? Yeah, I can do that. Say it like you mean it. Brennick swallowed, set his jaw. Something changed in his eyes. The wide-eyed Ohio kid receding behind something older and harder. I can do that. Good. Kane checked his own weapon, looked at the 4 of them. A 23-year veteran, a quiet operator, a first deployment kid, and a woman who just killed 12 human beings in less than an hour. Whatever happens, Kane said, nobody quits. Nobody stops fighting. If your rifle runs dry, use your pistol. If your pistol runs dry, use your knife. If your knife breaks, use a rock. We hold this position until there's nobody left to hold it. Petty officer, Marin said. Yeah? Thank you for letting me shoot. He looked at her. The guilt was still there. She could see it buried under the adrenaline and the training and the immediate necessity of survival. It would surface later. It would eat at him for years. But right now, in this moment, Jonas Kane nodded at Marin Whitlock with something that transcended respect. Trust. Don't make me regret it, he said. I won't. The assault came at 05:30. Dawn was bleeding across the eastern ridge. Thin gray light, the color of cold metal. When the first wave crested the slope, Not a line, a mass. 250 fighters surging up the mountain in a solid wall of bodies and weapons and rage. They came screaming. The sound hit the firebase before the bullets did. A roar that was more animal than human. The collective voice of men who'd been told that the only way home was through the top of this mountain. Every weapon on Firebase Summit Ridge opened fire simultaneously. The noise was beyond anything Marin had experienced. Beyond training, beyond simulation, beyond anything that could be described with human language. It was a physical force, a wall of sound that pressed against her eardrums and shook her teeth and turned the air itself into something violent. She blocked it out the way she'd blocked out every voice that told her she couldn't, the way she'd blocked out diversity hire and put the rifle down girl and she'll be a liability. She put all of it in a box and she closed the lid and she locked it. And she became the scope. Heavy machine gun team. 220 meters, 2 men running uphill with a PKM and a can of ammunition. The gunner was setting up behind a rock. 15 seconds and he'd have a clear line of fire into Sector 2's position. She fired. The gunner collapsed over his weapon. The assistant froze. That 1 second of human hesitation that combat training was supposed to eliminate, but never fully did. She fired again. The assistant fell beside the gunner. A third man, she hadn't seen him until he moved, ran forward and grabbed the PKM's carry handle, trying to drag it away. She fired. He dropped the gun and dropped himself. 3 down, 220. Machine gun team eliminated. She shifted. An RPG team at 190 meters, dangerously close. Close enough that if they fired, the rocket would reach Sector 2's bunker before anyone could flinch. The shooter was kneeling, RPG on his shoulder, sighting in. Behind him, the ammo bearer was pulling a second rocket from a canvas bag. She took the ammo bearer first. Counterintuitive. Textbook said, shoot the shooter. But if she shot the shooter, the ammo bearer would pick up the RPG and fire. If she shot the ammo bearer, the shooter would hesitate, look back, wonder what happened, lose his sight picture. The ammo bearer fell. The shooter turned. That half-second of confusion was all Sector 2 needed. 3 rifles barked, and the RPG shooter went down in a halo of fire. RPG team neutralized. Ammo bearer was mine. Sector 2 finished the shooter. Sector 2 confirms. Thanks, Sector 6. Thanks. From the same sector that had laughed about putting her on radio watch. The wave kept coming. Men fell. More took their place. The ground between the wire and the assault line was carpeted with bodies, and the living ran over the dead without slowing down because stopping meant dying, and running meant maybe dying. And in that calculus, maybe was the best odds anyone had. Marin fired and fired and fired, not frantically, not desperately, methodically. Each shot chosen, each target prioritized. She wasn't shooting at the wave, she was dismantling it, taking the leaders, taking the heavy weapons, taking the men who held the assault together the way a spine holds a body upright. A squad leader rallying a group that had gone to ground. She dropped him, and the group stayed down. A fighter with a satchel charge sprinting towards Sector 1's wire. She hit him at 180 meters, and the charge detonated where he fell, 50 meters short of the perimeter. A 2-man sniper team setting up on a ridge at 400 meters. She killed the shooter, and the spotter crawled away, dragging his dead partner's rifle, abandoning the position. Who is that? A voice on the radio she didn't recognize. From Sector 1, or maybe the TOC. Who the hell is doing that shooting? Sector 6, someone answered. She thought it might be Garrison. She thought his voice might have cracked when he said it. That's Whitlock. And then from a voice she would never identify, a voice buried in static and adrenaline and the impossible chaos of a firebase fighting for its life, came 6 words that would follow her for the rest of her career. That girl is dropping them like God's right hand. She heard it, filed it, kept shooting. Because the wave wasn't stopping. The bodies were piling up, and the assault was stalling in some sectors. But the sheer mass of fighters was overwhelming Sector 3's remnants and pushing toward the gap that the earlier attack had torn open. If they got through that gap, they'd be inside the perimeter. And inside the perimeter, a sniper rifle was useless. Inside the perimeter, it was knives and pistols in bare hands. "They're pushing through the Sector 3 gap," Thorson shouted. "I need fire on that breach, everything you've got." Marin swung her scope to the breach. 40 meters wide, fighters were pouring through like water through a cracked dam. She could see them climbing over the destroyed fighting positions, over the sandbags, over the bodies of the Americans who died defending that ground 3 hours ago. She started shooting into the breach. One target, two, three. Each one bought the firebase another second. But there were too many. For every man she dropped, two more came through behind him. Her bolts cycled so fast the action was hot under her fingers. "I can't hold the breach alone," she transmitted. "I need guns on that gap." Sector 5 shifted fire. Sector 1 repositioned a machine gun. Rounds poured into the breach from 3 directions. The fighters in the gap went from running to crawling to dying. But it still wasn't enough. The wave was thinning, but not breaking. The assault commander, whoever was running this operation, was still out there, still coordinating, still pushing fresh fighters into the gaps as fast as the old ones fell. As long as he was alive, the assault had a brain, and a brain could adapt. Marin pulled her scope back. Wide view. Stop thinking about individual targets. Stop thinking like a sniper. Think like a hunter. Where is he? Not at the front. Commanders don't lead human waves. They stay back. They watch. They direct. Not on the flanks. The flanks had been shattered by her earlier engagements. The fighters there were leaderless. Behind. He'd be behind the main assault. Far enough back to see the entire battle. Close enough to communicate with his subordinate leaders. On high ground if he could get it. With optics. With a radio. She scanned the rear area. Past the assault line. Past the reserves. Past the dead ground where the bodies of the first attack still lay. All the way back to the far ridge. 560 meters. The same boulder cluster where she'd seen the flash at midday. The observation post she'd reported. The one Kane said was a heat mirage. There. A man standing behind the largest boulder with a radio handset pressed to his ear. Not firing, not running, directing. His free hand was making sharp, deliberate gestures, pointing left, pointing right, chopping the air in signals that meant something to the subordinates around him. He had 2 bodyguards flanking him. He had a folding table with a map spread across it. He had binoculars around his neck and a calm, commanding posture that radiated authority. The enemy commander, the brain of the assault, the man who'd planned the scouting, the flanking, the technical, the mortar coordination, and now the human wave. The man who'd studied Firebase Summit Ridge and found every weakness except one. He hadn't accounted for her. "I have the enemy commander," Marin said. 560 meters, far ridge, boulder cluster. Kane looked through his binoculars, found the target. His face went tight. "That's too far. You'll never—" "I will." "Marin, 560 meters, dawn wind. You've been shooting for over an hour. Your barrel is hot. Your muscles are fatigued. The probability of—" "I don't miss, Kane." He stared at her. She stared back. And something passed between them that went beyond rank and protocol and the entire structure of military authority. It was the look of a man who'd learned at the cost of 9 lives to trust the woman in front of him. "Take the shot," he said. She settled in. 560 meters, the longest shot she'd ever attempted in combat. Dawn winds shifting east to west. 6 miles per hour, now increasing. Uphill angle. Hot barrel. She could feel the heat radiating from the handguard, warping the air above the muzzle by fractions of a degree. Fractions that mattered at this distance. She calculated, adjusted, breathed. The enemy commander lowered his radio. raised his binoculars, looked directly at Firebase Summit Ridge, directly at the western flank, directly at Sector 6. For one frozen instant, Marin felt like he was looking at her, through 560 meters of mountain air. Through the scope, through the crosshairs, two people on opposite sides of a war, staring at each other across a distance that only one of them could cross. She fired. The round traveled for nearly a full second. She watched it through the scope. Not the bullet itself, but the trace. The faint shimmer of disturbed air that followed the path of a high-velocity round through cold atmosphere. She watched it rise, arc, fall. The commander jerked backward. His binoculars flew from his hands. His radio dropped. His bodyguards spun toward him, reaching, grabbing. Too late. He was already falling, already gone. "Commander down," Marin whispered. 560 meters, confirmed kill. The effect was instantaneous. The assault didn't slow. It shattered. Like a window hit by a stone. 1 second it was a coherent structure. The next it was fragments flying in every direction. Unit leaders who'd been receiving orders suddenly had no orders. Fighters who'd been pushing forward suddenly had no direction. The coordinated, disciplined, terrifying wave became a crowd. And a crowd under fire is not an army, it's a target. Sectors 1 through 5 poured everything they had into the disintegrating assault. Machine guns, rifles, grenades. The fighters broke, turned, ran. Some threw down their weapons. Some dragged wounded comrades. Some simply stopped moving and lay flat on the ground, choosing surrender over the long run back down the mountain. "Cease fire," Thorson's voice, hoarse, breaking. "Let them go. Cease fire." The guns went silent. One by one, sector by sector, the last echoes bounced off the ridgeline and faded into the valley. Marin pulled her eye from the scope. The world expanded. Sound, light, sensation rushing back in like water filling a void. She could hear her own breathing, could feel her own heartbeat, could feel the rifle's heat through her gloves, and the cold rock under her knees, and the wet trickle of blood running down her left arm, where the shrapnel had grazed her an hour ago. She hadn't felt it until now. "It's over," Brennick said. His voice was barely a whisper. He was crying, not sobbing, just tears running silently down a face that looked 50 years older than it had 12 hours ago. "Is it over?" "It's over," Drexler said. Kane slid down the rock wall until he was sitting on the ground. His hands were shaking. His rifle lay across his lap like a dead thing. He looked at Marin with an expression she'd never seen on a special operator's face. Not gratitude, not admiration, not relief, but something rarer than all of those. Awe. "How many?" he asked. Marin closed her eyes, counted. Not the way the debrief would count, with charts and grid coordinates and clinical terminology. She counted faces, videos she'd seen through her scope in the half-second before she ended them. Each one distinct, each one human, each one someone's son. 11, she said. 11 confirmed. Kane exhaled a long, shuddering breath that carried something out of him that he'd been holding for 4 hours. 11 kills, 1 engagement, 1 sniper. He shook his head, looked at the sky, looked at the blood drying on the rocks, looked at the woman sitting across from him, cleaning her rifle with hands that trembled but never fumbled, caring for the weapon that had just held a firebase together when everything else fell apart. One sniper who wasn't supposed to be in the fight. Marin didn't answer. She pulled the bolt from the MK-13, inspected it, wiped it clean, slid it home. The action closed with a solid, definitive click. The firebase had held. The extraction route was secure. Somewhere in the southern corridor, a SEAL team was moving toward an asset who would never know that his life had been saved by a woman who'd been told to put her rifle down. She set the weapon across her lap and leaned her head back against the rock wall. Her arm was bleeding. Her ears were ringing. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. But the rifle was clean, the mission was intact, and Marin Whitlock was still breathing. That was enough for now. That was enough. The medevac helicopters came in at 0630, two Blackhawks, rotors hammering the thin mountain air, dust spiraling up from the landing zone in a brown cyclone that got into everything. Marin watched from Sector 6 as the stretchers came out of Sectors 3 and 4. She counted them, forced herself to count every single one. Body bags first, heavy, sagging, anonymous in black plastic. Then the wounded, bandaged, bloody, some conscious, some not. A young operator from Sector 4 was carried past on a stretcher. His left arm was gone below the elbow. Wrapped in field dressings that were already soaked through, he was conscious. His eyes were open but unfocused, swimming in morphine and shock. He couldn't have been older than 25. Brennick made a sound, something between a gasp and a word that never formed. "Don't look away," Marin said quietly. "What?" "Don't look away from him. He earned being seen." Brennick forced himself to watch. His jaw trembled, but he watched. Drexler spoke without turning from his scope. "She's right. You look away, you forget. You forget, you get careless. You get careless, you end up on a stretcher too. Or worse." The Blackhawks lifted off, banking hard over the ridgeline, carrying the dead and broken toward a hospital that was already overwhelmed. Marin tracked them until they disappeared behind the eastern peaks. 9 dead, 14 wounded. One night. And 3 more nights to go before the extraction window opened. She thought about the men on those stretchers, about the fire team leader she'd seen at 240 meters, the one she'd wanted to shoot, the one Kane wouldn't let her engage. By the time she got authorization, that man had directed his flanking force into Sector 4's exposed side. 3 of the 5 dead in Sector 4 were killed in that initial flanking assault. Could she have stopped it? If she'd fired without authorization, broken protocol, violated the chain of command, taken the shot Kane told her not to take, would 3 of those men be alive right now? The math said, probably. The math said she would have disrupted the flanking maneuver before it developed. The math said 3 men died in the gap between her certainty and Kane's doubt. But the math also said something else. If she'd fired without authorization, she'd have been pulled from the line, disciplined, maybe court-martialed, and she wouldn't have been in position when the technical mounted that shelf at 320 meters. She wouldn't have killed the gunner. She wouldn't have stopped the mortar team. She wouldn't have broken the flanking force in the ravine. Follow orders and 3 men die now. Break orders and 20 men die later. There was no right answer. There was only what happened and what she'd carry. That weight settled onto her shoulders, not crushing, but permanent. The kind of weight that would still be there in 30 years, sitting on the porch of some house somewhere, hearing a sound that was almost like a helicopter, and feeling the ghost of Sector 6's cold rock against her back. "Whitlock," she turned. A medic was standing there, young, female, Hispanic. No, wait, she looked again. Not Hispanic, just dark hair, Anglo features, probably Greek or Italian ancestry. "I need to check that arm," the medic said. Marin looked down. Her left sleeve was soaked with blood, more than she'd realized. "It's fine." "It's not fine. You've been bleeding for 2 hours. Let me see it." The medic cut away the sleeve. The shrapnel had carved a 3-inch gash along her bicep, not deep enough to need surgery, but deep enough to need stitches. "You didn't feel this?" the medic asked as she cleaned the wound. "I felt it. I had other priorities." The medic pulled out a suture kit, began stitching without anesthetic. Marin didn't flinch. "I heard what you did," the medic said quietly. 11 kills, saved the firebase. "I did my job." "Your job was observation, not engaging. You went way beyond your job." Marin didn't answer. The medic finished the stitches, wrapped the arm, pulled out a thermometer. "Open." Marin opened her mouth. The medic placed the thermometer under her tongue. 60 seconds. Pulled it out. Her face changed. 94.2. I know. That's severe hypothermia. You should be unconscious. I'm not. The medic pulled out a different thermometer, digital, more precise, took another reading. Same result. She looked at Marin with something close to fear. How long have you been this cold? All night. It's normal for me. It's not normal for anyone. The medic grabbed her radio. TOC, this is Mendez. I need immediate medevac for Whitlock. She's got severe hypothermia and... Marin took the radio from her hand. I'm not leaving. You're dying. I'm functional. I stay until relief arrives. You don't understand. Your body temperature shouldn't support consciousness. You should be in cardiac arrest right now. But I'm not. The medic stared at her, ran another scan, checked her pulse, checked her pupils, pulled out a weight scale from her pack. Step on this. Marin stepped on the scale, 117 pounds. The medic checked her chart. You were 128 pounds at intake yesterday. Yes. You lost 11 pounds in 12 hours. Sounds right. The medic's voice went very quiet. That's not possible. Not without severe dehydration and rhabdomyolysis. Your kidneys should be shutting down. She pulled out a blood testing kit, pricked Marin's finger, ran the test. Her face went white. Your creatinine is elevated. Early stage kidney failure. You have rhabdomyolysis. Muscle tissue is breaking down. She looked at Marin's feet. Can you feel your toes? Marin flexed her feet. Barely. The medic pulled off Marin's boots. Both feet were white, bloodless. The medic pressed a finger into the skin. No color returned. Grade 2 frostbite, both feet. Circulation is severely compromised. She looked up at Marin. Her voice was shaking. 6 more hours and you'd be dead. You understand that? Dead. Brennick had been listening. Why didn't you say something? Marin met his eyes. Because they needed me more than I needed to live. The medic stood. I'm calling medevac. No, that's not a request, Corporal. You're a casualty. You require immediate... Kane's voice cut across them. Mendez, can she walk? Technically, yes, but... Can she shoot? Petty officer, her body is shutting down. She needs a hospital. Can she shoot? The medic looked at Marin. Marin picked up her rifle, held it steady, scope to eye. Hands didn't shake. Yes, the medic said quietly, she can shoot. Then she stays until relief arrives. Kane looked at Marin. 72 hours, then you're on the first bird out whether you like it or not. Clear? Clear, petty officer. The medic wanted to argue. Marin could see it, but she also saw what everyone on this firebase now saw. Marin Whitlock wasn't leaving until she was ordered to leave, and maybe not even then. Mendez packed her gear. I'll be back every 4 hours to check on you. You collapse, I'm dragging you to medevac myself. Understood. The medic left. Drexler handed Marin a canteen. Drink. All of it. Now. She drank. The water was warm and tasted like plastic, and it was the best thing she'd ever put in her mouth. You're insane, Brennick said. His voice was quiet, awed. You know that, right? I'm a sniper. We're all a little insane. No, I mean... He gestured helplessly at the valley, at the bodies, at the firebase that was still standing because of her. You were dying and you didn't say anything. Saying something wouldn't have changed what needed to be done. Brennick shook his head, pulled out a protein bar, handed it to her. My mom would like you. She's scary too. Drexler coughed. It might have been a laugh. With Drexler, you could never tell. March 23rd, 2024. 1 week later, base hospital. Marin sat in a plastic chair in a room that smelled like floor wax and stale coffee. And a colonel she'd never met asked her to explain in her own words why she'd engaged a target at 620 meters without explicit authorization for that specific distance. She looked at him. He had clean fingernails and a crease in his trousers that could cut paper. He'd never heard a bullet pass close enough to feel the heat of it. He wanted her to fill a box on a form. Because the mortar team was killing Americans, sir, and I could stop it. The colonel wrote something down, didn't look up. In the engagement at 560 meters, the enemy commander, your fire team leader, has stated he verbally expressed doubt about that shot. He did, sir, but you took it anyway. Petty Officer Kane expressed doubt about the range. He did not order me not to fire. I had standing authorization from Master Chief Thorson to engage targets of opportunity. The enemy commander was directing the final assault. He was a target of opportunity. The colonel looked up, studied her face the way people study a painting they don't understand. Corporal, your after-action report lists 11 confirmed kills across a single engagement. That's an extraordinary number. It was an extraordinary night, sir. Some people might call it unprecedented. Some people weren't there, sir. The colonel's pen stopped moving. The aide beside him shifted in his seat. These were not the answers they prepared for. They'd expected humility or bravado, the two responses they knew how to categorize. What they got was something harder to file: truth. The debrief lasted 2 more hours. Shot placement, ammunition type, range estimation methodology, wind calculations, rules of engagement interpretation. They asked her to reconstruct every kill in sequence, and she did, from memory, without notes, with the clinical precision of a surgeon describing an operation. Not because she was cold, because that was the only way to get through it without breaking apart. When it was over, she walked out of the briefing room and stood in the corridor and breathed. Just breathed, in and out, the way her grandfather taught her before a shot, the way she'd taught herself before everything else. That bad? She turned. Senior Chief Garrison was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching her the way he'd watched her that first night at Firebase Summit Ridge. But his eyes were different now. The calculation was still there. Garrison would always calculate, but the dismissal was gone, replaced by something that cost him more than he'd ever admit. They wanted to know why I took shots I wasn't specifically authorized to take, she said. What'd you tell them? The truth, which is that men were dying and I could stop it. Everything else is paperwork. Garrison pushed off the wall, took 2 steps toward her, stopped. I was your biggest doubter, he said. You know that. I know, Senior Chief. I looked at you stepping off that C-130 and I saw a liability. A checkbox, something headquarters sent us so they could say they'd diversified the sniper program. I put you in Sector 6 because I wanted you as far from the fight as possible. I know. That's twice you've said I know without telling me to go to hell. You're doing a fine job of it yourself, Senior Chief. His jaw tightened, then released. Something that might have been respect crossed his face. Grudging. Hard-won. The kind of respect that only matters because it was earned in the worst possible way. That shot on the commander, he said. 560 meters. Dawn wind shifting east to west. Uphill angle. Hot barrel after you'd already put 40-plus rounds through that rifle. That's a shot I wouldn't have taken. Why not, Senior Chief? Because I wasn't sure I could make it. Marin held his gaze, didn't blink, didn't soften. That's the difference between us, Senior Chief. I knew I could. He stared at her for a long time, long enough that 2 officers walked past and glanced at them and kept moving, long enough that the fluorescent light above them buzzed through an entire cycle. When I started in this community, Garrison said slowly, my first team leader told me something I've carried for 16 years. He said, the best sniper isn't the one with the steadiest hands. It's the one who trusts their training more than their fear. He paused. I've been teaching that to every sniper who's come through my section. Sounds like smart advice. It is, and I forgot it the second you walked onto my firebase. Because I was so busy seeing what you look like that I forgot to see what you could do. He paused. That's on me, and I won't forget the lesson. He extended his hand, same as he'd done at Summit Ridge. But this time it meant something different. At Summit Ridge, it was acknowledgement. Here, in this corridor, under these lights, surrounded by people who'd never understand what happened on that mountain, it was an apology. The kind men like Garrison make once in their lives. She shook it. He walked away, boot heels clicking on the tile floor, back straight, carrying whatever he was carrying the only way he knew how, silently and alone. Marin leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. She could feel the weight of the last 4 days in every muscle, every joint, every cell. Not just the physical exhaustion, though that was real enough, but the other weight, the invisible one. 11 lives taken, 9 lives lost. The faces she'd seen through her scope in the seconds before she pulled the trigger. She would carry those faces forever. Every sniper did. The ones who said otherwise were either lying or broken in a way that didn't show on the surface. Footsteps in the corridor. She opened her eyes. Kane, smoking a cigarette indoors, which was against every regulation in the building, and which he clearly didn't care about even slightly. He had a look on his face she hadn't seen before. Not the frustration, not the grudging respect, not the guilt. Something looser, something almost like peace. They're writing orders, he said. JSOC wants you for advanced reconnaissance. Task force level. Probably a Tier 1 support unit after that. I just want to do my job. Your job is wherever they need the best. He took a drag, blew smoke at the ceiling. And Whitlock, you are the best. She waited for the qualifier. The for your experience level. The considering the circumstances. The but you still need more deployments. It didn't come. Kane, yeah, you said I was top 2 snipers you've ever worked with. Who's number 1? He looked at her, dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his boot on government tile, which was another regulation violation he wasn't losing sleep over. I've been thinking about that since Summit Ridge, he said, and I changed my mind. Yeah? There is no number 1 and number 2. There's just you, and then there's everyone else. He said it the way Kane said everything, flat, direct, without decoration, which is how she knew he meant it completely. Jonas Kane didn't waste words on things he didn't believe. Thank you, petty officer. Don't thank me. Thank your grandfather. He built something I couldn't see because I wasn't looking. He paused at the door. I called my daughter last night. She's 14, plays softball, wants to be a Marine. What'd you tell her? I told her about you. He left. The door closed behind him. And Marin stood in that empty corridor and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not pain, not grief, but something warm and unfamiliar that she didn't have a name for yet. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just the feeling of being seen. June 16th, 2024, 14 weeks after Summit Ridge. Marin walked across the base compound. Her feet still tingled from the frostbite. Grade 2 had healed to Grade 1. Full recovery expected in another 8 weeks. Her kidneys had stabilized, creatinine levels normal, weight back to 126 pounds. The PTSD was harder to measure. She'd spent 6 weeks in treatment, sleep therapy, trauma processing, learning to live with the faces that showed up in her dreams every night. The 3 men from Sector 4, the ones she couldn't save, the ones who died in the gap between her warning and Kane's authorization. The psychiatrist had told her something that helped. PTSD isn't weakness, it's proof you're actually human. She'd pulled the trigger on a training shot 2 weeks ago and missed. First miss in 4 years. The psychiatrist said it was a warning sign, her body protecting her from the thing that had nearly killed her. They'd work through it, she could shoot again. But the shot wasn't automatic anymore. She had to think about it, had to remind herself that the target was paper, not flesh. She was learning to live with that. Corporal Whitlock? She turned. A young woman in naval uniform stood 3 feet away, holding a folder against her chest like a shield. Maybe 20, 21. Auburn hair pulled back tight, green eyes wide with something that hovered between nervousness and determination. "I'm sorry to bother you, Corporal. I'm Petty Officer 3rd Class Bryn Ashford. I report to sniper selection next month." Marin studied her, saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the folder too tight, the way she stood, feet planted, chin up, bracing for dismissal. She'd practiced this approach, probably rehearsed it 5 times in the hallway before working up the nerve. "What's your question, Ashford?" "I heard about what happened at Summit Ridge. I heard about the 11 kills. I heard about the 620-meter shot." She faltered, recovered. I wanted to ask if you had any advice. For selection, for all of it." Marin looked at this young woman who was about to walk into the same gauntlet she'd walked into 4 years ago. The same whispers, the same doubters, the same invisible wall built from assumptions and bias, and the comfortable certainty of men who'd never been challenged by someone who looked like her. "You're going to hear a lot of voices," Marin said. "Instructors who think you don't belong. Classmates who call you a diversity hire. Command staff who watch you fail at something once and decide that one failure defines you forever. Even though they watch 10 men fail at the same thing and call it a learning experience." Ashford nodded. Her eyes were glistening, but her jaw was set. "Don't listen to any of them," Marin said. "Don't argue with them. Don't try to convince them. Don't waste a single breath defending your right to be there." "Then what do I do?" "You shoot. You shoot until your shoulder is bruised and your hands are raw and your eyes burn from the scope. You shoot until the rifle feels like a part of your body. You shoot until the voices don't matter anymore. Not because they've stopped, but because your targets are falling and theirs aren't." Ashford's grip on the folder loosened. Her shoulders dropped an inch. "Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do," Marin said. "Let the target tell you. If you can hit it, you can hit it. Everything else is just noise." Ashford nodded, swallowed, blinked hard. "Thank you, Corporal." "Ashford, yes? When you get to the long-range qualification, the one at 800 meters where they put you on the hilltop with the crosswind, breathe out completely before your shot. Don't hold your breath. Empty lungs are steady lungs." Ashford stared at her. That's not in the manual." "No, my grandfather taught me that. Now I'm teaching you." Ashford smiled. It was small, brief, and fierce. Then she turned and walked away. And her steps sounded different than they had when she'd approached. Faster, lighter, like someone who just put something heavy down. Marin watched her disappear around the corner, thought about the chain, grandfather to granddaughter, sniper to sniper. One generation handing the next something that couldn't be taught in a classroom or written in a manual. Not technique, not knowledge, belief. March 2025, Advanced Sniper School, Colorado. Marin stood at the range with 14 students. 3 of them were women. That was new. 1 year ago, there were 0. She was lead instructor now, the youngest in the history of the program. They'd offered her Tier 1 support. She'd turned it down, said she wanted to teach. What she really wanted was to make sure no other woman walked into what she'd walked into. Alone, dismissed, told to put the rifle down. "Today we're going to talk about acoustic wind reading," she said. "The wind has a voice. It operates at frequencies between 40 and 65 hertz. Most of you can't hear it yet. Some of you never will. But for those who can, it's the difference between a hit and a miss at 800 meters." She demonstrated, closed her eyes, listened, called the wind speed and direction without looking at instruments, then checked with the weather station. Perfect match. The students stared at her like she just performed magic. "It's not magic," she said. "It's attention. Most people go through life ignoring 90% of what their senses tell them. Snipers can't afford that luxury. You want to be great at this? Learn to hear what everyone else ignores. One of the male students raised his hand. Corporal Whitlock, is it true you made an 1,100-meter shot at Summit Ridge? She paused. The legend had grown in the retelling. 620 meters had become 800, then 1,000, now 1,100. 560 meters, she said. The longest confirmed shot of that engagement was 560 meters on the enemy commander. Everything else is exaggeration. But the reports said, the reports are classified. What I'm telling you is what happened. 560 meters, dawn wind, hot barrel. It was a difficult shot, but it was possible. And I made it because I trusted my training more than my fear. She looked at the three women in the class. Care who's holding it. The wind doesn't care who's holding it. The wind doesn't care. The target doesn't care. The only thing that matters is whether you can make the shot. Everything else, every voice, every doubt, every person who tells you that you don't belong, that's just noise. And noise can't stop a bullet that's already flying true. After class, Corporal Bryn Ashford approached. She'd passed selection, top of her class, just like Marin. They're already starting, Ashford said quietly. The whispers, that I only passed because they needed to hit a quota. I know. How did you deal with it? Marin looked at her. This young woman who reminded her so much of herself a year ago. Angry, determined, carrying a chip on her shoulder the size of a mountain. I stopped trying to prove I belonged, Marin said, and I started just belonging. There's a difference. Proving means you're asking for permission. Belonging means you've already decided the answer. Ashford nodded slowly. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for learning. That evening, Marin's phone rang. Numbers she didn't recognize. She answered. Corporal Whitlock, this is JSOC Operations. We have a situation developing in... I appreciate the call, Marin said, but I'm not available for operations. I'm teaching. Ma'am, this is a direct request from... I understand, and my answer is no. I'm teaching. Find someone else. She hung up. Drexler was sitting across from her. They'd stayed in touch. He'd rotated back stateside, was teaching at a different facility. You just turned down JSOC, he said. I did. They're going to keep calling. I know. Why teaching? You could write your own ticket. Any unit in the military would take you. Marin looked out the window, at the mountains, at the range where 14 students were learning to shoot, 3 of them women who would face the same battles she'd faced. Because 3 women just started sniper selection, she said, and I want to make sure they know that when someone tells them to put the rifle down, they don't have to listen. Drexler smiled. Your grandfather would be proud. Yeah, he would. Her phone buzzed. Text message. From Garrison. Marin, thought you should know. We just renamed Sector 6 at Summit Ridge. It's now called Whitlock's Watch. Seemed appropriate. WG. She stared at the message for a long time. Whitlock's Watch. The dead zone. The position where they put people they wanted to forget. The place where they'd sent her to fail. Now it carried her name. She typed back, Senior Chief, I'm honored, but maybe call it the listening post instead. Better lesson. M.W. 3 dots appeared, then, denied. It's Whitlock's Watch. Deal with it. You earned it. She smiled, put the phone away, walked outside. The sun was setting over the mountains, the same mountains where she'd learned to shoot, where her grandfather had taught her that words are just wind, and wind, she'd learned, could be read, could be understood, could be used. The voices that told her she didn't belong were still out there. They'd never stop, but they were just wind now, just noise. And Marin Whitlock had learned a long time ago how to hear past the noise and find the truth underneath. She picked up her rifle, the same MK-13 that had held Firebase Summit Ridge together, walked to the range, set up at 800 meters, closed her eyes, listened. 52 hertz, East wind, steady, opened her eyes, adjusted, breathed, fired. Perfect hit. The rifle didn't care who was holding it. The wind didn't care. The target didn't care. And neither did Marin Whitlock. She just shot.